Hello. What if the most important thing that a book can do isn't change your opinion, but is changing the questions that you ask? That is at the core of today's show. This is episode 2 of my new series, Reading Between Realities. And this is the second episode discussing one of my favorite books, one of the foundational books to my hypnosis journey, and that is this, The Hypnotist Journey to Atlantis. So if you missed episode 1, don't worry, you can go back and watch that one after you've listened to this one. It's not a prerequisite. The heavy hitting information that we'll be going through isn't the review of the book, isn't the details of what happens in that book. It's more of what does that book bring to the discussion? How does it activate and energize the questions that we might ask and some of the topics and themes and ideas for now, through that lens, using the book as sort of inspiration. So I do encourage you, grab this book. Like I said, it's the book that launched me on my hypnosis journey. And I think that it is a wonderful journey, a wonderful story to help you to grow, especially if you're drawn to this subject, to Atlantis. I really love this series because this is like reading is such an important thing to me. And I love the ways that reading has really shifted my worldviews, shifted my understanding of reality, and not always lining me up with that author's opinion. Sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree. I think that's one of the failings of our education system is this idea that, oh, well, it's in a book, so it must be automatically true. And that is not, it's not true. It's not the case. We need to use our own discernment, our own gut, tuning into our own higher self information to discern as we navigate. So anyway, this podcast is really about those questions around healing, memory, nature, ancient history, the future, current times, and really how does all of this information, how does all of these stories and these ideas, how does it impact how we live our day-to-day life, and what does it mean for humanity here now, in this moment, in the present, because that's what's most important. That's where we are at right now. So this isn't, again, about convincing you of anything. I really encourage discussion and questions in the chat, in the comments, because the more that we can dialogue about this, the more that each of us can grow and learn, and that's, I think, what we're meant to do here. So, grab a beverage, get cozy, grab the book if you have it, and let's get into it. Let's get into it. So, welcome one, welcome all. All right, so we're going to start with a little bit of setting the scene and getting into what we are covering in the book, because this is it's got a good size to it, and I wanted to give us enough space to discuss things at a deeper level. And so I've split the book into 3 parts, 3 different episodes. So this is episode 2. We'll have one more on this subject before we move on to a different book. And setting the scene is going to help us just have enough context to understand these questions and these ideas. My hope is that you don't need to read the book in order to benefit from this conversation, from this discussion. Reading the book can enhance your participation, and if the questions, if the thoughts, the discussion today inspires you, I encourage you to go get the book and dig in yourself. Some of the questions that we'll get into today: what went wrong? Why did Atlantis fall? Why did Lemuria fall? What were we learning through that experience? What if they were so advanced? If they were so developed technologically, spiritually, what does that mean for their fall and that shift? We're going to talk a little bit about the value of a soul and what society now, I think, can learn from the mistakes of the past and these past epochs, these seasons of humanity that can teach us a lot if we are willing to listen. And then discussion around the golden age and what does that mean to build a golden age? What does the golden age actually mean? And why should we care? So before we get into the discussion today, before we get into the podcast, I want to share a few things coming up. One, the whole purpose of this show is bringing the attention, bringing the awareness, and fleshing out this Atlantis theme. And so I am putting on a workshop, a one-day event. This will be a 3-hour event, a little longer than I normally do, 3 to 6 p.m. on August 1st via Zoom. And this will include more than one. I'm deciding between 2 and 3 what we can fit into that 3-hour block. But we'll take multiple journeys to dive into your past lives, your experiences during Atlantis. And as the poster says there, it's not so much about the fall and the end times of Atlantis. It's about tapping into more of that golden age, that golden timeline, that portion of the Atlantean history that contains past life information for you to help you understand your role now in building this next golden age, and really help you to feel that connection, gain that insight, gain that clarity, tap into that energy, that frequency, that feeling of those lifetimes so that you can use that in your day-to-day now. And this will involve getting a sense of your gifts, your abilities in that lifetime, what you might have been developing, working on, because those echoes are here now today. And I think there is so much for us to learn and understand through our past life experiences that can help us to grow in this lifetime. So the Atlantis workshop is going to be really fun. We're going to go into meditation multiple times. And so it really allows for a deep experience. And for those of you who may not have done more than one meditation back to back, it is a different feel that second time around, and really allows you to let go even more, relax even deeper, and gain even more insight and clarity and experience through that. So grab a ticket. It's going to be a wonderful workshop, and I think really beneficial for us at this time. There's a lot of reasons that I'm planning this, some astrological, some personal, and I just think it's a wonderful moment to tap into that. So link down below for tickets. I encourage you, go grab one. Replay available if you can't make it live, but I really do encourage the participation there and joining the Zoom live. All right, friends. So let's get into it. So setting the scene, we're going to talk a little bit about the chapters that I covered. We covered chapters 1 through 9 in part 1. Today is chapters 10 through 15, and then we'll cover the remainder of the book in part 3, or episode 3, I should say, part 3, episode 3, all of that. So when we're diving into the story here, we had just left off in chapter 9 with the sort of brutal murder of the Queen of Lemuria by the Atlanteans. And they did this because they wanted the crystal power that the Lemurians had. They wanted the healing capabilities. They wanted the immunity from disease that they had. And they thought that that violence and control was going to get them that information. And so chapter 10 covers the coronation of Kala, the main character, who is Jen, Sarah's client, in this book. Because for those of you who didn't see part 1, aren't familiar with this, Sarah Breskman Cosme, she is a level 3 QHHT practitioner. So she does past life regression in the Dolores Cannon style. And this book details mostly her experiences regressing Jen, one of her clients, to Lemuria. Jen was Kala, a princess and then queen of Lemuria during the end times of Lemuria and then the end times of Atlantis. And so this book is a lot of regression transcripts and from Jen sessions as well as other people's. But so chapter 10, we dive in with sort of an overview of that coronation, and we get a glimpse into sort of the process, the symbolism of that coronation. And one of the really interesting pieces that came up here was the flower of life made an appearance. Some of you might be familiar with the flower of life, the sacred geometry symbol. If you don't know it, just give a quick Google flower of life. There's a lot of iterations of it, but chapter 10, one of the interesting pieces came through about the meditative qualities of the flower of life and how it was weaved into their architecture in a way of encouraging meditation and helping those who meditated on that symbol to get the answers to questions that they might have. And this was really interesting to me because the flower of life is the main symbol that Corbin and I use in our Organite creations. We have various iterations of the flower of life, and there's some other symbols too, but that's primarily been the symbol that we use. And I just think it's so beautiful for especially like the pyramids that we make. If you don't know, link down below for Pisces Portals creations. You can just go to the website too and go to the store. And you'll see those pyramids as well as pocket organites and stuff like that. But I love that we use that symbolism and use that symbol within our creations because I think it really shows the intention here with those items, especially those pyramids. We have a couple people who have come back and shared their meditation experiences with the pyramids and how powerful they are. So that was just a fun little interesting tidbit. Some of the discussion here also like brought up monarchies and leadership and sort of questions around that. So we're going to dig into that in a bit. So stay tuned for that because I want to really flesh that out once we move past the setting the scene. Chapter 11 was the wave that destroyed Amun, or Lemuria, as we call it. And this was a moment in the book where we witness the cataclysm, that giant wave that destroyed a huge portion of civilization. It destroyed the entire island of Lemuria, according to this, I should say, the majority of the island of Lemuria. There was discussion of bits and pieces of it surviving, Easter Island being one of those, but we get those detailed memories about what happened to Kala, what happened to her daughter, how that all played out. We also get some details around the survivors and those who did escape destruction in that cataclysm. Where did they go? What did they do? And we start to get clues at the connection between Lemuria and Mount Shasta, the connection between Lemuria and Egypt, the connection between Lemuria and like some of the Eastern cultures. And so it is very interesting to hear this account of that experience because as we'll get into a little bit later, there's all these iterations of the flood story, of giant waves wiping out civilization, of that destruction. And so it's interesting to hear this account and to hear this perspective on it. And what's really interesting is, and this is different. So I read this book. It's the first book that I read about hypnosis and Atlantis, and it's the book that launched me on my hypnosis career. Well, I haven't read it since, and in rereading it for this series, I had like a very physical response to this chapter. As I was reading it, I like had this spike of adrenaline and my chest like felt constricted. It was like hard to breathe. And when I had this physical reaction, I paused and I thought about it. Where was this coming from? Is this, something now and here? Is there something that's causing me to feel this way, or is it actually this material? Because I try to not just get swept up in the sensation of it. I try to be thoughtful and discerning about how I feel, what I feel, where is it coming from, what's the root, what's the source. So as I'm reading this chapter about this giant wave destroying a civilization, as I'm reading this account of a mother losing her daughter in that cataclysm, and beyond just her daughter, like losing her entire people essentially, and being captured, taken away. And one of like the darker parts of this was that the Atlanteans forced her to watch the destruction. They sort of pulled her out, pulled her up, and held her there, forcing her to watch and see as this cataclysm swept in. That wave destroyed everything. But what I realized as I was reflecting on my personal experience here, my physical experience with this material, I remembered a meditation experience that I had. This would have been a few years ago, and this was at at a Atlantis themed workshop. Actually, it was a meditation guided journey, and I don't remember the exact intentions there. I don't remember the exact like format or anything, but what I do remember is how I felt and the vision that I was given. The vision that I was given was me. I was a very young girl. I was probably like 5 or 6, maybe 7, like very young. Um, and I remember standing, I was outside, standing in sort of like a courtyard area. I had the feeling that there was like a temple or something that was nearby, and there was other people around me. I only remember women being around me. Um, Not sure if that's exactly true or not, but I do only remember women. And I remember I remember seeing this giant wave coming up. I remember grabbing a hold of my mom's hand. I remember her kneeling down and like putting her arms around me, and that's when the wave arrived and destroyed us, obliterated us. And I'm getting chills again as I'm talking about this, because it was a surprise. I was not expecting to see this scene, and the emotions that came up with it too. I was very emotional. I was crying, and I definitely had a release with that realization, with remembering that memory. And at the time, I did equate that to Atlantis. The thing about it is, I'm not as sure now that it was, especially because of my emotional and physical reaction to this chapter and this content around the Lemurian cataclysm. And so, whether or not that meditation was Atlantis or not, I think that, well, I don't think, I know that I have a connection to Lemuria as well. And I think I talked about this last show. I do have a sense that I had multiple lifetimes going on at the same time during these moments. Um, but I think more so than obsessing over the details, obsessing over the this or the that, there's such a cerebral way of processing past lives and information, and that can be helpful to an extent, but it only gets you so far. And I think it's really understanding more so the feelings and the emotions that are triggered, the ways those memories might connect or tie into this lifetime. We'll talk a little bit more about fear and the ways that our subconscious or higher self can use fear as a catalyst to get us to remember, to help us guide us into a place or a situation where we're able to understand and integrate that past life. So we'll talk about more of that in a bit here. Chapter 12, though. So chapter 11 is really about that cataclysm, the survival, some of the ways that survivors did make it out, and the ways that memory really does come through for a reason. For a reason. So chapter 12, Egypt. Egypt is brought in, and this was a fun section of the book because, as I sometimes do on my channel, Sarah shared in this book some of her own personal sessions exploring these topics, and she had a couple experiences with past life regression that connected some of the dots for her and helped illuminate her part in the story and the reason that she is called to this information and to sharing it with us. And in this chapter, Egypt is brought in. There's stories about the Sphinx and dreams. Essentially, there is a lifetime that Sarah had where was she received guidance and downloads through the Sphinx to prepare her, as well as her companions on that journey, to help welcome the Lemurian refugees, the survivors from the cataclysm. Because in that lifetime, Sarah's past life, she was a part of sort of an outpost, if you will, of Lemuria. And so this was someplace that was far enough away that it was not directly destroyed by that cataclysm, that catastrophe. And it was a place where survivors were able to gather. And because of that experience with the Sphinx and the downloads that happened and the sort of accelerated soul growth and spiritual growth that Sarah got in that lifetime, she was able to help with the bringing in and the caretaking of those survivors. This portion of this story, along with the bits about Mount Shasta as well, were really quite fascinating to me because I have family connections to Mount Shasta. I have family that lives out there right now. And when I lived in California, I lived relatively close to Mount Shasta. I never went to the mountain itself. This was before my spiritual awakening, and yet I know there was a reason that I was close. And there were some times where I got very close to it. I essentially visited the family that lives very close to Mount Shasta. A dear friend of mine as well, who's a fellow hypnotist and energy healer. She recently went on a retreat to Mount Shasta and shared with me when she returned her experiences interacting with beings that were not human in that location. Her accounts detailed quite a few experiences over the days that she was there, with a variety of beings, including Sasquatch, but also including the Lemurian remnants, if you will. And I can't remember the exact name that she used for those people, and I didn't take the time to look it up before I hopped on here, but she did have experiences interacting with them, connecting with them. And she's definitely one of those friends that we have a very deep soul connection. And I would not be surprised if we had our own past life connections through Lemuria, through Mount Shasta. But yeah, chapter 12 was an interesting one and brought in Egypt to the discussion. When we get into chapter 13, there is more details given on the capital of Atlantis, where Kala, where Jen, Sarah's client, was taken in that lifetime and imprisoned. And we are given more details about sort of the reality of that time, the ways that these people worked, how they interacted, the culture of it all. And there is really like a focus on the remembrance piece here. And we're going to get into that as we talk about this golden timeline, this golden age, and what it could mean to return to that golden age. But this idea of how remembrance ties into that, what is memory, what is the benefit, the purpose of past life memories coming back, being returned, and that the question is sort of turned around. Instead of saying, how is the golden age something new? How is it a discovery of something new? And instead, it's more of, how can the golden age be a remembrance instead, a return to wholeness, a return to a more, how do I want to put this? Like a more whole version of you. And how does that affect the whole version of humanity? And this is something that I talk about a lot, and this is part of the motivation for the Atlantis workshop, right? Is that remembrance, is that reclaiming, and um, that reactivation of those past life memories, those experiences of your soul that you're being called to remember at this time. And how can that change you? How can that inform who you are in this lifetime and help you to be that best version of you? So it's an interesting chapter, and without getting into all of like the details and the weeds, that's just kind of a brief overview. So um, compassion is a main piece of chapter 14, because chapter 14 really talks about more of the societal makeup of Atlantis, and we start to get more of an idea of what what they were doing, how they were doing it, uh, and as I talked about last episode, there's a pretty dark shadow cast on Atlantis in this book, and Lemuria is very much held as like a more loving, more compassionate, more spiritually attuned, and like more. I mean, it's framed in a better way than Atlantis, who is talked about very consistently as being cold and analytical and scientific and disconnected from compassion. And I have my questions around that, which I talked a little bit about last time, and I'm sure it'll come up again this time. But that framing and that sort of black and white duality mentality, because I think that there is much to discern about the source of this information, being a queen of Lemuria, and how this information came through, and what is it doing, in how it's shared and who is sharing it. And not to say that Sarah or Jen was trying to obfuscate the truth or anything, but there are moments in here where Jen, her higher self, will acknowledge that, well, it might not be all of Atlantis, but what I can see is this. And so there is some acknowledgement within the text itself, acknowledging that there might be more nuance to this society, this culture, than originally presented here, from her account. But the I feel like the main thing that we get to see in this chapter, uh, is the hierarchy of these societies, is the ways that they have class divisions and social judgments of each other, as well as those who are not Atlanteans, and the ways that they treat people who are different, and the ways that, yes, there is technological advancement, there is some really fantastical, cool things described, like in the technology that they implement and use and have discovered. But I think one of the main messages here is the ways that technological advancement does not guarantee spiritual maturity, compassion, and that, as we see today, which we're going to get into that, as we see today, lacking compassion, lacking the human side of things, that's the main problem. Because technological advancement without compassion, without heart-centeredness, it's a slippery fucking slope. And I feel like we can see that coming to life now, today, with so much of scientific advancement, and even the ways that, right, like AI is coming in, and the ways it's being implemented, the way it's being used. And it's like, is this heart-centered? Is this compassionate? Is this focused on humanity, or is this progress over anything else? Um, okay, so chapter 15. I know we're. I want to give you guys the ground here, the foundation here, before we dive into more of this discussion. So chapter 15 probably was like the heaviest, darkest chapter thus far. And not that the cataclysm wasn't dark, but um, there was there's something different about this recount. This is another one of Sarah's personal sessions that she uncovered information about a lifetime she had in Atlantis, and um, this was not at the same time as Kala and the fall. This would have been before that. But ultimately, Sarah shares a lifetime where she was a judge in Atlantis, and she was a very high up judge, very respected. And she and two other judges were put in charge of determining deciding the fate of those Atlantean citizens who were affected by genetic manipulation, genetic mutation. And this all came about from experimentation that they were doing on people that went awry and caused problems that were beyond the scope of what they were intending, because this was supposed to help people get those traits. Well, here, I'll give you the context. So the experimentation was with hybrids and using DNA manipulation to see if they could give humans animalistic qualities that were beneficial. So the things they talk about are cats and the feline characteristics of dexterity and flexibility and strength, and the spiritual side that cats have. Reptilians were also another one that they brought in for the benefits that they could have. This is a lot focused around war and like violence and such. And that's where they started with this experimentation. But what happened was the experimentation went awry, and you had, yes, like physical alterations that people experienced. But this went beyond just the beings that were experimented on. This spread through the generations and ended up mutating and causing not only physical changes but mental changes as well. And so ultimately, they had this problem they needed to deal with, and these judges were in charge of determining what to do. And they sent all of those hybrids. Not all of them. There were some that were allowed to integrate and stay in society, but many of them were sent off to an island, supposedly to live in isolation in their own community and be like rehabilitated and taken care of. And ultimately, they find out that that was not what they were actually doing, that they in fact were killing all of those people. And so there was this mass murder, this mass killing of these hybrid beings, trying to erase the harm that they did, trying to just get rid of the problem by deleting it out. And towards the end of the chapter, we get more of how things played out after that, and how things did shift, and there was a shift in perspective, and they ended up pivoting and doing their best to I shouldn't say doing their best. They ended up looking at these hybrids and trying to determine how they could be beneficial to society. And once they figured that out, that they could be beneficial to society, they sort of embraced them and utilized that benefit for their benefit. And I think that this really raises some questions around how we treat each other, the ways that we value and put worth on each other and ourselves. And we're going to talk more about that. So overall, this chunk of chapters brings things beyond just the stories, and we start to get a little bit more understanding, a more fleshed out picture of these civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria, and who they really were, what was really going on at that time, the ways technology, that spiritual advancement played out in these different cultures, and really what I want to move into now is this idea of these questions that this brings up. So let's dive into the first one. So what went wrong? I think that many people who have a cursory understanding of Atlantis think of Atlantis and think of the fall, and they think of the abuse of technology. I would say that that is kind of the general, most basic, like, piece of information that people know about the fall of Atlantis and what happened there. The fall of Lemuria, I feel like, is a little less distilled, I would say. And maybe that's because some perceptions of that epoch is that that was even further back than Atlantis. This account definitely connects the two, and we have the ways that Atlantis is credited for the fall of Lemuria. But with both of these places, both of these cultures, both of these civilizations, right? If they were so technologically advanced, especially for the Lemurians, if they were so heart-centered and compassionate and spiritually aware and had the like beautiful utopian society that they had, how did they fall? I feel like this book does a better job of explaining Atlantis and why they fell. Again, sort of fleshing out that idea that technological advancement, without the compassion, without the human side of things, that led to their fall. But with both civilizations, and especially with Atlantis, I think understanding the idea that advancement was not enough, that this incredible technology, this incredible understanding of consciousness, use of consciousness, it was not enough to sort of like save those civilizations. If we take like a real big step back, like, and we bring in the ideas about the processional cycle, the idea of the yugas, or these big shifting, turning, cyclical patterns that human society, human civilization, humanity goes through, this planet is going through, consciousness goes through. And like all of that is, I feel like, far beyond the scope of this podcast, but hopefully you guys are aware of enough of that idea, that concept, that you can understand that we can take a really big step back, look at the big picture, and understand, okay, these two epochs, these two civilizations, they fell because that was a part of the natural energetic cycle of consciousness. That if we just choose one and we focus on, say, the yuga cycles, the yugas detail the ways that we move through these different ages, and we move from the gold age to the silver age to the bronze age to the silver age to the gold age. And I'm not directly quoting that, so don't quote me on it, but that's the general gist of it. And I might not have the exact order correct. I'm not a scholar of the yugas, but that concept really makes a lot of sense to me, these bigger movements and changes. And I think that at the macro level, that can explain it all. Well, it was a shifting consciousness, and that was a part of the natural cycle of humanity, and that was how it played out here. When we zoom back in, though, to the details of this story and the ways that this information can make us and help us, give us the opportunity to reckon with some of this and think about some of this, we can look at especially Atlantis and see the ways that their hierarchy and the treatment of people and the ways that fear and exclusion and power played a role in the dynamics between them within the Atlantean society, but then also beyond, as they interacted with the Lemurians, and I'm sure with others who would have been around at that time. I just can't imagine that those were the only two civilizations. I mean, could be, but I do imagine that there's more going on in other places as well, especially as we get hints at some of those like outposts or those sort of fringe areas of Atlantis, of Lemuria, that indicates to me that there's something beyond. We don't get to see what that is in this story quite yet. But all of this questioning around what went wrong, how did they fall? I feel like a lot of this, whether it be the hierarchy, the treatment of humans, the treatment of people, the fear, the idea of like exclusion, of separation, of segregation, the power and control that we see playing out here, it all makes me think about now, here, this present moment, this, especially I feel like the ways that we see our power structures set up, the ways we see, and this isn't every single person, but this is the systems, and I would say at least the majority of the narrative, and whether that's truly an expression of what's happening in real life, I think there's some nuance there, but this all like, I can't read about the fall of Atlantis and not think about our present moment. I can't read about all of this and not think about the things that we're going through here and now in the present day, in the year 2026. And I think that those similarities, those commonalities, those echoes are the reason that revisiting and understanding what we need to learn from these lifetimes for ourselves, but also for the broader society. I'm going to see if I can find the quote that there's a quote that I wanted to read to you guys, and now I'm thinking about it, and I think that I can find it. So this was in the chapter around the mutations and the genetic experiments. Sarah asks, what was the purpose for these people to have been mutated and then discriminated against? Jen's higher self answers, the purpose was to show how people are treated differently by society, and that a society will turn on themselves when they exclude those who are different rather than be inclusive of differences. We are seeing that in our society now, and that is why this book needs to be written. Sarah says, why? Jen's higher self says, because we are seeing the same inequalities happening to people of different colors as we did when we had people of different colors there. Sarah says, is this a cycle that goes on and on? Jen's higher self says, yes. And so there is reason here, right? We got some of the details around the foundations of this planet earlier in this book, and that showed the ways that difference was identified as danger, and that that fear, as fear integrated into the world, that the fear played off of those differences, and that emotional reaction, that fear, that self-preservation, survival, like that caused the patterns to form, and these ways of treating people to sort of come into existence. And when we have cycles, like it said there in the book, when we have these cycles of similar things coming up again and again, that those are opportunities for us to reckon with and choose a different path. And so because we are experiencing that sort of like othering and the fear that comes along with that now, that's mirrored in Atlantis, I think that is the invitation to choose something different now, to look at how we're reacting, how we're treating each other now, and really choose something different. Which brings us to the value of a soul. There's a lot of talk in here about about value, about worth, about who belongs and who doesn't, and how does one belong. Whether it be the discussions of hybrids and the mutations, the experiments in here, whether it be the stories of Kala's experiences in imprisonment in Atlantis and the ways she was othered and the way she was treated differently and so poorly because she was Lemurian, not Atlantean. There's a moment in there where she's sharing with Sarah a moment where she tried to escape and she ends up making it a decent ways. And she's basically like out in the city amongst the Atlanteans. And at quite a few points during this, she brings up the fact that they're like recoiling from her. They're like terrified of her because she looks different. And granted, she's also been imprisoned, and so she's not looking good. Even if she was, but she did look different from the start. And we see that othering of those who didn't look like them. All of the details around the judges and this idea of like judging who can stay in society and who is deemed too dangerous or too disruptive or too different and needs to be isolated, needs to be sent off, needs to be get that out of here, right? And I just it's just so plain to see for me, the parallels here and the questions that this story, this idea can bring up for us, as it relates to how we treat each other now, here in this moment, and the value of a soul. To step out of sort of the story for a moment and share a little bit of like personal experience. I've been working through a lot of my own patterns, hangups, hurts, trauma around self-worth, self-love. I grew up in a very religious household, and whether my parents intended it or not, whether the church intended it or not, my young mind associated worth with lack of sinning. And because sinning came in so many different forms, and for me, my homosexuality, me being gay, was inherently a sin. That was like, it was a really hard thing for young Jake to understand, to see for what it was. And I'm realizing now as an adult the ways that those experiences really set the foundation for a lot of the trauma triggers, the activations that I have in my current life now, that are inviting me to choose a different way, to release that old programming and embrace a sense of worth that's inherent rather than based off of what I do or don't do. And so I think it's interesting that I'm having these experiences, this idea, this concept shown to me personally. And I think we're seeing this in so many different ways around the world, whether that be in your own city, your own town, or on the world stage. The value of people and how they are valued, what they're valued for, what makes a person worthy or not, is, I think, shown in so many different ways. So within the story here, I talked a little bit about the hybrids, right? And these victims of the genetic mutations and the experimentations that the Atlanteans were doing. And the ways that these people who were Atlanteans, they were a part of this culture, this society. They theoretically should have been, welcomed and celebrated, but because of their different appearance, because of their different abilities, because of the differences, they were viewed differently and they were othered. And so, and it wasn't until there was one a well, so there's the productivity side of things. It wasn't until they realized that, oh, these hybrids, they have something they can contribute to our society. Oh, they have gifts and abilities that we can use that can benefit us. There also is in there the king of Atlantis, I believe it was said. The king of Atlantis, his child was born with one of these mutations, and so that was a part of the switch too. Was the leader was directly impacted by this, and that direct impact allowed the leader's perspective to be shifted and changed. And so I think that the question that I immediately thought of, right, was, wow, how do we value people today? How do we? What is the worth that we assign to people? Well, I think you can I think you can visit most cities and take a look uh, at the homeless population, at the unhoused population, and really get a um, very clear understanding of what is valued and who is worthy, because those people they are judged, they are mistreated, they are looked down upon. I worked downtown Minneapolis for quite some time, and I smoked cigarettes when I worked downtown, as a coffee shop manager, and so I would go out smoking, multiple times a day. And one of the things that I got used to was homeless asking me for a cigarette, and I had my own process for determining whether I gave them a cigarette or not, and that was determined by me and how many cigarettes I had, what my money situation was, but also like who were they, how were they approaching me, and mostly like trusting my gut with like, I'm going to, or oh, I'm not going to. And sometimes it would be, oh, I'm going to give you a cigarette today, but then after the third day of them coming and trying to get a cigarette from me, I'm like, hey dude, like I'm not loaded, I don't have the money to just buy cigarettes for everyone. Anyway, because I smoked, because I was outside, I interacted with a lot of the unhoused. And I remember specifically there was one woman who she was she she had suffered a lot of mistreatment by the systems, by other unhoused people, and the ways that she felt because of that, the emotions and the sense of um, the the way that that treatment made her feel was heartbreaking. And it was really tough to see someone who is a soul, has a soul, is a God spark, is a part of the whole, being treated like that. And because she did drugs, because she wasn't productive, because she didn't hold a job, because people deemed her not smart enough, because she had health issues that were off-putting, because she didn't have the abilities that others deemed worthy. And I think that question is one that we're all being asked to reckon with. I think, with the value of a soul and what does that mean. I think we're being given the opportunity one on one, like personally, and maybe not everyone, maybe not every single person is experiencing that, but I think many of us are, especially as we see shifts and changes in the jobs, and I mean, employment is shifting and changing rapidly, and yet our society has tied people's worth to their job. They have tied their identity to their job, to their career, and yet we're at a moment where careers are shifting in in ways that many are having a hard time anticipating. And I was just hearing from the other day, a woman at the gym was talking about her son and how he lost his job of 15 years because they were downsizing. He'd been at this job for 15 years. And she said, I'm having a really hard time getting him motivated again. I'm doing my best to encourage him and help him like find his way forward, but it's really hard. And honestly, I can like, do you hear that? I can feel the emotions coming through, and that's probably because I'm going through some of that myself, right? Um, there are these moments where we can judge ourselves for not making enough money, not having enough clients, not being productive enough, uh, not doing the right things. And yet, what is the value of a fucking soul? Is it inherent because they're a consciousness? Because they're conscious beings? Is the value of a soul inherent? Because I think that's what many a spiritual tradition would say. I think that's what many self-help gurus are saying. I was just having a conversation with a friend the other day talking about this exact thing, and she was trying to remind me, like, hey, your worth is inherent. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be anything to be worthy, to have value. And yet we live in a society that really pushes that program and pushes that propaganda to us. And I think it's interesting that we have so many of these similarities with Atlantis, and that age where we can see our technology really skyrocketing right now, and that's just the tech that they let us see, right? What is behind closed doors? What's still in development? What has been taken and used, militarily in secret? It's beyond what we are aware of and what we can comprehend at this time. But all of that technology doesn't stop the mistreatment of humans, the devaluing of souls, the abuse of our fellow humans. And you know, this sort of idea, I think, is something that is bigger than all of us, but it's also a part of each of us. And I've had the topics of fear, I've had the topics of value and worth come up in so many different sessions, in a variety of different ways. And I would say, like, first, the most consistent message that I hear from clients' higher selves, from their subconscious during sessions, is a message of love, a message of compassion, a message of inherent value and worth that goes beyond your purpose in this lifetime, the lessons you're learning, beyond the acts that you do, the relationships you have. Like, this value, this worth is inherent in you, beyond what the higher self has to say around this and the ways that people are grappling with this idea in the present lifetime. There's also, of course, past life experiences that can come up. And this is where I want to bring back that idea of fear, because one of the things that we see in this book is the ways that fear of water, fear of deep water, fear of drowning, really leads many of the clients that Sarah talks with to see her. And I've talked about this before, but it bears mentioning again and again. Fears are oftentimes those signals to us from our higher self, from our subconscious, in what we need to grapple with, what we need to reckon with. And what we're being called to heal in this lifetime, whether that be from the past in this lifetime or past lives, right? It's not always beyond this lifetime. Sometimes it's here and now. Oftentimes it's both. And all of this talk of hybrids and of genetic experimentation, like, it immediately made me think of a session that Corbin and I did together. We did share this on the channel, so you can go and look at full session recordings, and you'll find the one that's called Origins of Fear. Corbin and I did that one last year. That lifetime was a lifetime, a regression that we delved into Corbin's lifetime as a centaur, and this was not like fluffy Greek mythology. This was a situation of a hybrid, and there was a lot of questions around: was I born this way? Was I made this way? But there's others like me. Who am I? What am I? What is my place here? But he was a being that was half horse, half human, and the similarities between these stories of the ways that hybrids were described as monsters in this regression that Corbin and I did. There were humans that were hunting these beings, and they were hunting them down and capturing them at the behest of ETs, of aliens. This is what came through in the session, and that these ET beings, these non-human beings, were experimenting, and we weren't given a definitive answer during that session, but the question was raised again: was I born this way, or was I created to be this hybrid? And there was a question of, was it these beings that created the hybrid in order to reverse engineer? And there's a lot of similarities between the motivations there too, of like the qualities of that animal and how that could affect humans, and how that could benefit humans. It's interesting too, the cooperation between the extraterrestrials and the humans in that regression. We don't see necessarily the same kind of cooperation in this book, but in A Hypnotist Journey to Atlantis, we see the ways that the extraterrestrials laid the foundation and sort of seeded these civilizations. And so some of the experimentation, that cold scientific approach, according to this book, came from the ET founder of Atlantis, and that energy and that intention sort of became a part of the culture, became a part of the society, became a part of the people. And it's really interesting as well, because another similarity is that Corbin, this lifetime came up for him because we were looking for the origin of his fear around blood. And this was an irrational phobia that he was like, I don't want to keep reacting this way. Like, I don't want to keep having these situations where blood like causes me this extreme like fear and physical reaction. And so we did this session to look into it, and we found this really interesting lifetime, this really like wild story that connected through that fear. And that fear of blood was the sort of calling card, or the flag signal to say, hey, look at this lifetime. And we see that with the water fear in this book. And so I really think that, like, a little tangent that I want to go on is about the fear, because I think we so often we place such a negative connotation on fear. And I think that there certainly are negative aspects to it. And in imbalance in that way certainly can be detrimental. I want to find, though, there was a quote don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. I wrote down the page number, but I'll just paraphrase it. I don't want to dig. So essentially what they said here, this was a portion of the transcript where Sarah was talking to Jen's higher self and asking for more information. Basically, they were talking about fear and how fear was a foreigner essentially to Earth, that fear did not exist here, but came into being, came onto this plane, onto this realm, onto this planet, sort of by accident, that it like hitchhiked its way in, essentially. And I think this concept is really interesting to consider. And it got even more interesting because Jen's higher self said that essentially fear has as much a right to be here as we do. And that it's not so much about eradicating fear or getting rid of fear, that it's more so about how do we work with it? How do we grapple with fear and how it affects us and how it impacts us? How do we take responsibility for those ways that we act upon it? And how do we choose a different path? How do we integrate fear in a way that allows us to move forward without this sort of like magic wand solution of just like getting rid of it? Because, it reminded me of a conversation that Corbin and I had the other day about higher dimensional beings, and the idea that not all higher dimensional beings are going to be acting for your best and highest good, that they can be higher vibe or higher dimensional and still be acting in a service to self way, or in a negative way, if you will, for looking at that duality, that polarity. And what Corbin and I were talking about was that duality exists higher than the third dimension, higher than the fifth dimension. I don't have a definitive like fear exists and duality exists up until the ninth dimension. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if it's necessarily that like cut and dry. But this idea that there are higher dimensional beings that are acting in a service to self way, acting in that more negative duality way. And what does that mean for our discernment? But also, what does that mean for fear? Because if we look at fear being the opposite of love and sitting on that polarity, that duality spectrum, if higher dimensions include both service to self and service to others and service to all, like what does that mean for fear? Does fear disappear at the higher dimensions, or is fear still in existence? And I would hazard a guess that fear still exists for a time, for a reason. And I think some of that is in the pretty simple ways that we understand it here in a very 3D way, right? You appreciate the light because of the darkness, right? You appreciate the relaxation and the the chill time because you had the busy time and you did the stuff, right? It's through those opposites that we're able to understand the more positive spectrum. And so I think there are ways that we understand love through fear, right? Through our experiences with fear, our experiences with moving past it, and the ways that it affects us. So I feel like it didn't like directly tie into this like value of a soul, but like the fear piece, it was really interesting. And that idea that fear has a place here, I think is a little controversial. I think most spiritual folk want to ditch fear and want to like be done with it. And I think we oftentimes like I mean, I can I can remember the past 6 months to a year, like, that's been such a heavy message, is, like, choosing love over fear. And I think that that is still the message, but I think it's understanding that our problems are not solved simply by removing something, and that ties beautifully into the story here and the ways that the Atlanteans took those hybrids and sent them off and destroyed them and obliterated them. And that there was this idea that, oh, if we destroy it, if it's gone, if these people are no longer here, it's not a problem anymore. But as they experienced, the problem didn't just go away with killing all of them, because this was not that easily solved. And so I think there's something here for us to start to chew on, start to think about. And I mean, put it in the comments, let me know down below what you think about this idea of fear and it having a place here on earth. Because I think it's interesting to consider. And I think I think we have just so much to understand and learn about reality, duality, dimensions, all of that stuff. I mean, I feel like there's just more questions. Every question you ask, there's more questions. As I see 1:11:11 on my timer here for the recording. It's interesting. All right, it's time. So, building the next golden age. So, I think that this idea of the value of a soul, I think that concept ties into this idea as well. But I wanted to end here. I wanted to really like take a moment to think about this, because it's really interesting for me rereading this book, because there's parts that I don't remember. And as I was planning this workshop, the workshop was planned in part because of the astrology reminder. I'll pop it back up. Remembering Atlantis, August 1st, 3 to 6 p.m. Central. And I planned this workshop not having read this book again. And then as I was thinking about launching this new podcast and what book to start with, I was like, of course, we're going to start with Hypnotist Journey to Atlantis. It ties into the workshop beautifully. And then there was really this like fascinating portion in here where I'm going to see if I can find it, because I did want to read this quote. And I wrote it in my notes further down my page, but I really do not want to dig through my notes for a year. Just trying to see if I can find it easily. It was about this golden timeline and this idea of the golden age returning. It's okay. We're going to go with the gist of it again, because I'm not going to sit here for forever and do this. And I don't want to overly edit this because I really think the stream of consciousness is important. So the idea presented was that Sarah's higher self said that the golden age is a golden age of remembrance. Less to do with technology, less even to do with, less to do with psychic gifts, less to do with like the flashiness of like a new age, and more to do with like the real humanity of it. And what I mean by that is that the remembrance, the golden age of remembrance, is a remembrance of our soul memories. I think part of that is reintegrating and remembering our past lives more and more, and that is part of coming into this age, coming into this moment. This is why I have the workshop around Atlantis and the past lives and connecting with that golden age, because it's less about Atlantis being perfect, because I don't think that it was. And I don't think that we're aiming for perfection now either. I think that is a mischaracterization of what it means to be in a golden age, what it means to be uh, awakening, what it means to be ascending, all of these buzzwords, all of these terms. And I don't think that it's quite as cut and dry or as like simple as, staying high vibe all the time. I think that there's value in staying high vibe. I think helping yourself to return to a base level that feels good to you is really helpful. But as I experienced today, sometimes the emotions, sometimes the reactions can grab us, can hold us, can yank us around. And it's less about judging yourself or like giving yourself a slap on the wrist of like, don't do that. You should stay high vibe, get back into that high vibe. It's more so taking a moment and saying, why? Why is this coming up for me? Why am I feeling this way? Why am I acting this way? And having grace enough with yourself to ask those questions, to understand that you're feeling that way, you're acting that way for a reason. And that reason is showing you your shadow, showing you that hurt part of you, that portion of you that is stuck in that energy. And that could be childhood, right? I talked a little bit about my religious trauma from childhood that I'm in the process of letting go. And I've peeled off a lot of layers of that, and yet I'm finding that there's more and more and more layers. And it doesn't mean that I'm never going to get to the center of that onion, but it does mean that healing is not a linear journey. It is a nuanced ebb and flow. And that's really hard for me as someone who is recovering from perfectionism, because I want my healing journey to be perfect. I want it to be a linear trajectory. And, Corbin could probably say something about my Chiron in Virgo in the 12th, in that idea that I need to be on a linear, trajectory, always doing better. But that's not the reality. And so it's through self-reflection, self-honesty that we can recognize and acknowledge the ways that a part of us, a part of our soul, a part of our energy can be stuck in that moment, whether it be from childhood or it be from past lives. But it's also understanding the ways that remembrance is more than just the trauma. That remembrance is also the remembrance of our gifts, our abilities, our soul's growth in other lifetimes. And I really wanted to make sure to emphasize this with the workshop, that yes, this could involve unlocking psychic abilities for you. This could involve pushing you to the next level in whatever it is that you're working on developing, that you're working on expressing in this lifetime. But there's so much more that falls under that umbrella of gifts than telepathy or telekinesis or any of those other like flashy ones, right? Love, compassion, these are important gifts. Leadership, courage, these are important gifts. And those are the pieces of the puzzle that I think we need to focus on, pay attention to, because it's through those very human, very real, basic gifts that the new world is going to be built. It is less to do with learning how to telepathically move bricks with our minds, and more to do with how do we treat each other. Because if we're truly going to learn from the Atlantean history, if we're going to truly learn from our soul experiences in these other lifetimes, this story of Atlantis tells us that it is not enough to evolve your technology. It is not enough to evolve your consciousness alone. There has to be this, heart-centeredness. And I know, like, coming from the heart, being in the heart, uh focusing on the heart, like, this is in some ways like very buzzwordy, right, for spiritualism and our modern sort of like spiritual lingo. But there's such an important truth at the root of that, and it's that without heart, without compassion, without love, we will repeat the mistakes of the past. We will end up with another fall. We will end up in a repetition of what happened here. There was a point in there where Jen's higher self said, you know, uh, we can choose to take either path, and depending on what path we take, well, we might end up back again in 10,000 years to try again, to try to choose a different path again. And I think we can look at that and say, "Oh God, that's so discouraging. What if we make the wrong choice? What if we don't make it as humanity? What if we don't stay love-centered, heart-centered?" Well, then that's what we chose. And I think the beauty in this message is that there is always a choice. There's always another opportunity. And I think that's something to be looking out for anytime you're hearing messages from people, if they are making ultimatums, if they're saying, you know, doomsday sort of things like, oh my God, if we don't do this, then we're uh, we've lost all hope and nothing, we'll never make it. um Listen to the root of those messages. It's rooted in fear. It's rooted um in that frequency, rather than a frequency of understanding the free will and the agency that we have, and the ability that we have as a collective to choose paths, to choose where we are going and what we are doing, and to, I guess, bring it back around to the message that was so consistent over the last year, and just keeps coming up in sessions personally and with clients as well, is how do we work with fear, and what does it mean to work with fear? And if eradicating fear is not a realistic or a, I guess, fair thing to do, right? Because if fear has a place here, we're not going to destroy it. We are not going to banish it. We are not going to eradicate it in such a way. It's how do we understand it? How do we integrate it? How do we stop letting the fear unconsciously rule our lives uh, and push us along a path unconsciously? And how do we step more into our agency and power, and understanding that choice point, understanding, as hard as it is, and I'm here recording on a day where it was hard. I had a tough day with my emotions and with the fears that came up and the uncertainties and the worthiness thing. So even when it's hard, how do we hold on to, how do we remember that choice that we continue to make, that is what is building the next golden age? That choice to love ourselves, to have compassion for ourselves, um, that is where it starts, and then it ripples out, because the ways that you treat yourself will show up in the ways you treat others, even if you don't think so. And this is something that I really have grappled with for a long time. because I've struggled to love myself in a lot of ways. And I'm learning and growing in that. But I'm really good at, and I would say most people say that I'm a kind person, that I'm nice to other people. And that has been something consistent throughout my life. But what I've had to be really honest with myself about is, what is the motivation for that nicety and what's happening under the surface? What's happening where I don't think people are seeing? Because there can be these ways that we are silently judging others, that we are keeping those opinions to ourselves, but we're still feeling them, and those can bleed out into the ways that we treat people, maybe not always in a physical way, but definitely in an energetic way. And there also can be that side of treating people kindly, treating people nice, where you're using that to try to keep people around, to prove to people that you deserve love. And it's like, oh well, if I'm nice enough to everyone else, if I'm amicable enough, if I'm charismatic enough, then great. Like, no one's ever going to leave me, and I'm gonna be fine the whole time, which is not true. In fact, sometimes it can be the undoing of relationship, because you're not coming from a place of authenticity and honesty, and you're compartmentalizing that relationship or parts of that relationship. Anyway, getting off into the weeds. August 1st, 3 to 6 p.m., come check out my workshop on Atlantis. And if you're watching this, I really encourage you to grab a ticket. If any of this resonated with you, if you are inspired to explore more your part in building this next golden age, if you are looking for, um, you know, looking for some of that soul memory that can help you to step into this next level, this next stage, this next expression of your soul's gifts. And I think, again, it's less about the flashy ones and more so about the very real ones. Because if we can't treat each other kindly, if we can't love and respect and build a world where we all are valued, for that spark of God energy, that source energy within each of us, we're just going to repeat those patterns, and we're just going to end up back in the same place that we were at this time. And that's why these stories, I really think that that's why these stories are coming up now, and why we're being invited to remember. Because I don't think the next golden age is going to come because we finally understood crystals, or like because we finally found free energy, or because we finally advanced science enough. I think the golden age will come because we have remembered how to love each other, and we've remembered the value of compassion in the ways that we treat each other, in how we set up our society and our culture, in the things that we value, in the things that we assign worth. And I think that it's really in there. It's really in that simple message of compassion, of love, that we need to return to again and again. Because again, we're not, the crystal technology will come afterwards. The free energy, the advancements in science, they will come, but we cannot lose sight of our humanity. We cannot lose sight of our hearts. And this I think this is the message that I want to leave you guys with. Yeah. So thank you for joining me today for part 2, episode 2 of this new series, Reading Between Realities. And This is part 2 of 3, covering the Hypnotist Journey to Atlantis. After that, we'll jump on to another book, but um, grab a ticket to the Atlantis workshop. The experience is going to be transformational. I know that. I really have such a good feeling about this event, and I'm excited to see who feels called. So if you're feeling called to dive into your past lives, get a ticket and come back in a couple weeks for part 3, wrapping up our discussion of A Hypnotist Journey to Atlantis. And let me know in the comments what book you want me to do next. If there's another spiritual book, hypnosis book, I have like 1,000 options that I'm like weighing. So especially if there's a Dolores book that you'd be interested in hearing about, or if there's another hypnotist that you think I should explore, let me know. There's Anne's books too. I've been thinking about maybe tossing one of Anne's books in there as well, because I really think that could be interesting. So thank you guys for joining me. Like, share, subscribe. Let me know down in the comments what resonated with you. What questions did this bring up for you? I really want there to be some discussion around this, because these concepts, these questions are not straightforward. And the more we can dialogue and talk with each other about them, it helps us to expand and grow. So leave a comment, please, and share this out with someone who maybe likes reading or maybe is interested in these sorts of topics, these sorts of questions. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye, y'all.